Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, let me introduce myself. My name is Kurdiatun Madia and my NPM 1922-0075. I'm from B1 class, English Education Study Program 2019. Today, I want to presentation about research proposal. And this proposal by Sita Hediati Rahayu SPT. Chapter 1 is the title. Title this proposal is Teaching Vocabulary Using Categories Games to the 10th grade students of a senior high school in Cimahi. And the next slide about background of the research. Language is an important part of human life. Humans evolve into social creatures out of necessity. As humans, we need each other. No matter how sophisticated technology is, Shobha Srinivasan, PhD, and Linda A. Weinberger, 2016. Language plays an important role in everyday life, and people cannot go anywhere without language. Language can be the mediator between one people with the others, because language can be used to communicate with others. English is able for linking and make easily people in the most of countries are communicate each other based on the development in the field of economy, business, education, and also politics. According to Parmawati 2018. English is the most spoken language around the world. In Indonesia, English is used as foreign language that learned in school. There are 4 basic skills in English, such as reading, listening, speaking, and writing. In addition, grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary are also skills in English that must be mastered if you want to be proficient in English. The researchers assume if without mastering enough vocabulary, all basic skills will not be achieved easily, because with enough vocabulary anyone will be able to achieve all English basic skills. When experienced as practical teacher in senior high school, in teaching and learning process, the researcher found lack of students' vocabularies is the serious problem. In a preliminary study, researchers found that grade 10 students had very limited English vocabulary. They even still have difficulty when asked to write 50 nouns they can see around them. The media and strategies used by the teacher greatly impact the students. If the teacher provides a strategy that makes students interested, students will be happy to follow the learning. But if the teacher uses an ordinary strategy, then students will feel bored. And the next slide about research question. Research question inquire about the relationship among variables that the investigator seeks to know. According to John W. Creswell, 2009. In the research question, there are 3 points. Number 1 is, how are the scenario and the implementation of teaching vocabulary using categories to the 10th grade students of Smanford, Cimahi? The second is, what are teacher and students' response toward teaching vocabulary using categories to the 10th grade students of Smanford, Cimahi? And the third is, What are the students' difficulties is learning vocabulary using categories to the 10th grade students of Semen for Cimahi. And the next slide about objective of the research. Objective indicates the goal or objective of a study according John W. Krasel 2009. And the objective of the research is there 3 points. The first is to know the scenario and implementation of teaching vocabulary using categories to the 10th grade students of Semen for Cimahi. And the second is to know the teacher and students' response toward teaching vocabulary using categories to the 10th grade student of Semen for Cimahi. And the last is to identify the students' difficulties in learning vocabulary using categories to the 10th grade student of Semen for Cimahi. And the next slide about significance of the research. The significance of the research is there 3 points. Number 1 for the teacher, number 2 for students, and number 3 for next learning process. Number 1 for teacher. For teacher have 2 points. The first is may become a comparative study for the teacher in teaching vocabulary. And the last is can use this research for instructional materials. Number 2 for students. For students have 2 points. The first is improving students' vocabulary, and the last is enjoying the funny and interesting classroom. And the next, number 3, for the next learning process. In here, we get 2 points. Number 1 is as a reference for the learning process, especially in teaching vocabulary, and the second is to know the comparison approach towards students' improvement in vocabulary. And the next slide about definition of key terms. Number 1 is vocabulary. According to Series 1, 2007, state that vocabulary, which is synonymous with lexics or lexicon, is viewed as a collection of words or a package of subsets of words that are used in particular contexts, according to Ningrum 2019. And number 2 is categories. Categories is a creative thinking category-based party game originally published by Parker Brothers in 1998. Parker Brothers was purchased by Hasbro a few years later, and they published the game internationally under their Milton Bradley brand. And number 3 is teaching vocabulary. Teaching vocabulary means the activities done to learn how to produce many English vocabularies. The teaching vocabulary also means how the teaching learning process can achieve the main goal of language learning, namely teaching vocabulary. And the next slide about literature review. A. Vocabulary. Number 1 is definition of vocabulary. Vocabulary is a set of words in a particular language. Vocabulary also is the list of words arranged is usually in alphabetical order. Richard and Renandia 2002 in Izzah 2015 state that vocabulary is a core component of language proficiency and provides much basic on how well students speak, hear, read, and write, according to Zahratul Izzah 2015. Number 2 is types of vocabulary. Aside from the bright of vocabulary, there are 4 types of vocabulary types, namely, number 1 is listening vocabulary, number 2 speaking vocabulary, number 3 reading vocabulary, and the last writing vocabulary. 3. The importance of vocabulary. Mastering vocabulary is very important in the process of learning English. According to Gusiros 2010, there are several reasons that make learning vocabulary is important. Increasing vocabulary allows you to use more descriptive words to communicate your goal better. B. Categories games. Number 1 is definition of categories. Categories is a creative thinking category-based party game originally published by Parker Brothers in 1998. Parker Brothers was bought by Hasbro a few years later, and they published the game internationally under their Milton Bradley brand. The objective of the 2 to 6 player game is to score points by uniquely naming objects within a set of categories given an initial letter within a time limit. Categories ND. Categories game is a game where the player must write a list of words according to the instruction, for example, instruction in the form of letter and certain categories. 2. Procedures of playing categories. The procedure of playing categories there are: first is the teacher will divide the students into a group of the people. And the next is the teacher will make a score table on the board for the game result. And the next is the teacher will show the game sheet table. And then the teacher will give question. The winner groups will be all to choose alphabetical cards. And the next is the card contains the alphabet. And the last, then the group that can fill the table sheet first gets a score. 3. The components of categories. Components of categories. There are table sheet, colorful markers, letter cards, categories cards, and scoreboard. And the next slide about research methodology and research procedure. Research methodology. Researchers use a descriptive qualitative method because it was felt that this method would be appropriate to answer the problems that were mentioned in the research question. Strider 2002 stated that descriptive research provides an answer to the question of how something happened and who was involved, but not why something happened or why someone was involved, according to Molida 2013. And then the research procedures. There are 3 points. Number 1 is preparation, and the second is implementation, and the last is evaluation. And the next slide about subject of the research. The subject of this study will focus on the 10th grade students of public senior high school in Cimahi, totaling 16 male students and 20 female students. Based on a preliminary study by the author, students have the following characteristics. There are 2 points. Number 1 is has very limited vocabulary, and the second is has a difficulty in writing and speaking. And then the next slide about instruments of the research. Research instruments are simply devices for obtaining information relevant to your research project. According to David Wilson and Peter Birmingham, 2003, there are many alternatives from which research instruments to choose. According to Arikunto, 1995, there are four methods of collecting data commonly used in a research. They are observation, interview, questionnaire, and the last documents. And then the next slide about data analysis. Miles and Haberman, 1984, suggests that qualitative data analysis consists of three procedures. A. Data reduction. This stage refers to the process where with the mass of qualitative data you may obtain, such an interview transcript, field notes, and the observation sheets are reduced and organized, for example, coding, writing, summaries, discarding irrelevant data, and so on. At this stage, the researchers will try and discard all irrelevant information, but to ensure to the access to it later if required, and the researchers need to re-examine some data previously considered unnecessary. B. Data display. To draw conclusions from the mass of data, Miles and Haberman suggest that a good display of data, in the form of tables, cards, notebooks, and other graphical formats is essential. This is a continual process rather than just one to be carried out at the end of the data collection. C. Conclusion drawing or verification. This initial conclusion can then be verified. That is, their validity examined through reference to the existing field notes or further data collection. According to Matthew B. Miles and Michael Haberman, 1984. And then the research schedule. You can see the table is the research schedule from the research schedule from this proposal from November until March. And then the summarizing. English teachers need an interesting and effective way to enrich students' vocabulary. Teaching of vocabulary needs more attention and preparation because vocabulary mastery is important in language proficiency. The students will try to be an active, competitive, fire, and brave. Sometimes language learning is boring and frustrating. But the teacher must be careful to choose what game is suitable for language learning, especially in teaching vocabulary. Preparation because vocabulary mastery is important in language proficiency. And then the reference. And the last, that's all my research proposal. Thank you for your attention and thank you for your watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.